So when we read in Scripture that no one has ever seen him, only the Son reveals him, it's true. I can see I am. I can see I am's manifestations. I see the necessity of a creative imagination clothing itself in concepts of itself. And I can see myself clothed in concepts of myself. When Scripture speaks of David, this is he, rise and anoint him. And then the Spirit of God came mightily upon David from that day forward. What does it mean? He's clothed with David. But then who is David? You are David. You're doing the will of your Father. He'll put you through all the furnaces of affliction because he cannot give his glory to another. How can I give my glory to another? He can't give it to another. He has to make it you himself. And so he clothed himself with David as he clothed himself with Gideon. He clothed himself with you, and you are doing the will of your Father. So I have found in David, the son of Jesse, which is I am, a man after my own heart who will do all my will. You are doing your Father's will. So everything that you've imagined, you are doing it. I can tell you of numberless things that would contradict completely the findings of so-called science today, and blaming this, that, or the other for a certain effect. And I could turn to just as many on the opposite side who never did the things that they claim you must do in order to have the effect, and they ask, then why? Why does this happen to this crowd who never subjected itself to the test that you have given, and yet they have the same effect? A sign granted by God to those who will receive it. But the signs of God's wonderful redemptive activity were not the signs that Israel was expecting. Therefore, they completely rejected it. They would not accept it when I tell you this is what it is. You are born from above, and you're born in this manner. And you rise from the grave, and the grave is your own wonderful being. It's your own skull. Then, if you don't believe that because of the trees of false teaching, well, then you'll reject it. I'm telling you the truth. But if you've been conditioned through these traditional wrong thinkings, these trees must then be removed. When these evangelists, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and they're all anonymous names, when they wrote their gospels, they were not writing biography. They were writing theology. They were not writing secular history. They were writing the history of redemption. It's all the difference in the world. Men not knowing this, they read it as secular history. And they think here is the biography of a man called Jesus. The whole story of Jesus, from his birth through his ascension into heaven. So all that I have told you, and all that I will continue to tell you, is simply in Scripture, but it is not biography. It's theology. It's simply the knowledge of God and God's way of redemption. That's the entire story. But if I take it as the world takes it, as biography, and simply secular history, well, then I miss the point completely. So I'm free of these trees of traditional wrong thinking. And that means I am pure in heart. But I make no claim to the purity based upon man's concept of purity. Has nothing to do with any purity as the world thinks it. He turned to the harlot and says that the one who has no sin, let him cast the first stone. And from the oldest to the youngest, they all left, because none felt within themselves good enough to cast the stone. Because he interpreted the entire story as a psychological story. That if you lust after a person, well, the act has already been committed. You may restrain the impulse, but he tells you that isn't good enough. But then who on the earth could stand before me and tell me he's never had the impulse? Unless he was castrated at the time he was born, and then he doesn't even know, so he could restrain nothing. He has nothing to restrain. If he was removed at birth from the possibility of lusting, and yet you are pure in heart the day you see David. For the minute you see him, you know the whole vast world has collapsed as far as you are concerned. The whole thing has collapsed. And now you no longer can turn to this, that, and the other and blame it or praise it for anything that's happening in your world. You are simply within yourself. You are God himself. You are the God, creating good, bad, and indifferent in your world. A friend of mine in the audience tonight, he said, I had this vivid dream. My wife and I, and here we are, and the world is coming to an end. The whole thing is coming to an end. It began to shake. A wind, the unearthly wind came up, and then the rain like a flood, and then the earth is shaking. And I said to myself, well, the earth has gone out of orbit. I wasn't afraid of death, and my wife, she wasn't afraid of death. But I thought the whole thing was simply coming apart and coming to an end. That's a wonderful adumbration. Read it in the 13th chapter of Mark. Read it in Matthew. You see these buildings? Not one stone will be left standing upon the other, but it will be turned down. That's when the Son of Man is coming. That's the end of the age. Well, in your case, you had a most wonderful adumbration. And you're not given these adumbrations when you're far removed from the actual event. And this thing happens to you, be watchful. It's coming. This is simply a foreshadowing in a not altogether a conclusive way, no, the way you saw it. But when it happens, when the whole thing collapses, and the ideas by which you lived in the past, you no longer can live by them. You just can't live by them. Nothing external, the whole thing is internal. The whole drama of life is a psychological drama, and now you know it. So your vision is perfectly marvelous, perfectly wonderful. Others are finding themselves interwoven in their lives, 2 and 3 and 4 together, all interwoven as though this thing has been going on over and over again. It has been going on. Before the world was, we were one, and yet individualized. We were brothers, greatly in love, a love beyond the wildest dream of man. And we deliberately and purposely came down into this world, a purpose. And as the poet says, when we are so curious about why are we here, he said, be patient. Our playwright will show in some 5th act what this wild drama means. So here we have it in 4 acts, like the 4 corners of the universe. Wait, be patient. In some 5th act, he's going to show what the wild drama means. And it will be beyond the wildest dream of man. So when you read Scripture, don't take anything for granted. For this simple little statement, I have heard so many ministers from the pulpit take that 6th beatitude, and they made, the strangest thing out of it. They frightened the people to death. But they went through that door after the service, and they wondered how on earth would I ever see God. For they knew in the depths of their soul, if they had to be pure, as he pointed out what you had to be, well, then you could never see God. But you'll never see him, save you see him through the Son, because you are spirit. You don't look into the mirror and see God. You see him in his Son. Thou art my Son. Today I have begotten thee. And as you're told, if scholars are not convinced that the 2nd Psalm is that of David, but read the 4th chapter of the book of Acts. And you say, O sovereign Lord, creator of the heavens and the earth and the seas and all therein, who by the mouth of our father David, thy son, did say, then he quotes the 2nd Psalm. If you want any confirmation as to who actually wrote that 2nd Psalm, read the 4th chapter of the book of Acts, which is written by the author of the book of Luke. And in the book of Luke, you read the words in the 20th chapter. Why did David in the Spirit call him Lord? If David thus calls him Lord, how can he be David's son? For in calling him Lord, he confessed he was his father, not his son. And now this is written by the Son, as told us in the 4th chapter of Acts, and first revealed in the 2nd chapter of the book of Psalms. And I will tell of the decree of the Lord. He said unto me, thou art my son. Today I have begotten thee. So here the drama is really in you. The whole drama is in every individual in this world. And it simply only unfolds in man. And when it unfolds in man, what in this world is worth more than the unfolding of the drama in you?